Okay, all right. Today is chapter 21 and at least most of 22. I kind of have a plan in mind unless we have like extra time. But like I said, I want to keep it to an hour because I know I can just go on and on and on.
No worries.
Okay, so last week we talked about Egypt, right? Assyria will overrun Egypt, and we likened Egypt to the United States. This week, we're actually talking about Babylon actually falling in chapter 21, and then in 22, we are talking about how Jerusalem is going to be attacked and scourged. So, chapter 21, the burden of the desert of the sea, as whirlwinds in the South Sea pass through, it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. So the first thing I think we need to discuss is, what is the desert of the sea? That's kind of a confusing term, right? Because I was just thinking, okay, I can't think of anything that's a desert in the sea or an area. There's a few different descriptions or other scriptures that support that this is Babylon, okay? So Jeremiah, let me add my chat. So in Jeremiah, we have him talking in chapter, it's 51 and it's 31. And he talks about Babylon and that she dwelleth upon many waters. I have to remember which book it's in. Yes. So in the Old Testament manual that I reference a lot, this says on page 157, it says the use of this phrase has puzzled many commentators. Specific countries have received the burden, yet no known country is named. But some people believe Isaiah used it as a symbolic name, and they believe that it alluded to Babylon. Here's why. That city sat on a hot and dusty plain in the Euphrates Valley, but anciently, before flood control dams were built, the whole plain was flooded each spring during the high water runoff of the Euphrates. Thus, Babylon sat both in a desert and on a sea, which I think is interesting, right? But it's a lot like the Nile, where seasonally it would overflow, it would provide everything they need for crops and for all that, the farming that they needed, and then it would reseed and become a desert. It's kind of like Utah, actually, only we get it as snow when we're supposed to. Well, we used to. When I was a kid, man, we always got snow. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And then we have another description of Babylon being sitting upon many waters, and this is by John the Beloved, and this comes from Revelations chapter 17, and it is verses 1 and verse 15. Okay, and John describes Babylon as sitting upon many waters and explains the waters to be peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. That would be symbolic of Babylon's dominion over the world. The desert would be a land without water, or if you use water as symbolic of Christ, it's a land devoid of the belief of Christ, or those who have any regard, maybe even for Christ. And a ruler without Christ, the living water, they would be spiritually devoid. So it's like they're sitting on top of everything, ruling, and they're teaching you don't need Christ. And they're saying, especially the ruler, I'm better than God, I am God, those kinds of things. Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 28:2, he actually depicts, and he calls him the king of tears. So it's just a different phrase, but if you read this chapter of Ezekiel, it's so close to what we're reading in this chapter as well. But it says he depicts a king of Tyre whose heart is lifted up, who says, I am a God, I sit on the throne of God in the midst of the seas. So you're going to see this ruler who is just power hungry and I rule all kind of attitude. So that's what we're talking about with the desert of the sea. So there's a couple things to back up. This is Babylon, okay? Babylon, remember symbolically, is the world, okay? So we're talking about the evilness of the world, those things that, or those people who are choosing material things, who are choosing idols, who are choosing everything but Christ. And there's a few really interesting things that we're going to see as well that relate to our day. So that's kind of interesting. The whirlwinds in the south are coming to pass through, okay? And this is actually an unidentified invader coming against this land. So we have a hint in the next verse as to who they are historically. But when we talk about this for our day, because that's what Isaiah's prophecies really are for, we've got to consider that these are other nations who are aligning themselves with Babylon, okay? Or the wicked punishing the wicked, right? So these would be wicked nations that are trying to take down Babylon, but we're going to see what happens. Okay, verse 2, a grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media. All the sighing thereof have I made to cease. I liked Gileadi's translation with this one. He says, the traitor in the act of treachery, the destroyer laying waste. Attack, O Elamites, lay siege, you Medes. All the sighing that Babylon has caused will I will bring to an end. I am stumbling over my words today. So Elam and Media, however you want to say it, they were enemies typically, but they joined forces against Assyria. So even if we're using this rather than being actual Babylon, but as Assyria, because they really do represent the same thing ultimately, right? Just a world power, superpower wants to torture God's covenant people, or the righteous, everyone actually. They want to take over the world and defy God. So these two were they were allies only for the case of going against Assyria. They gained their independence shortly from Assyria until shortly after Isaiah's death. Assyria gradually then expanded into their territories. So I put up a map. I have to share a computer and my thing, everything disappears. Okay, so there is a map here. And you can see, so we're talking about this tiny little area here for now, right? Elam, this isn't the right map with my picture of Elam. Let's see if I can quickly find it. So Elam and, right here, this one might be the right one. Okay. Nope. I can't find it. That's okay. So Elam and Media, they are neighbors to this whole area, okay? They're going to be right around here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Oh, no, they're over here. See that right there? Media and Elam. So they're pretty far away, actually, from Jerusalem. So I was wrong. They're pretty far away, but they're right next to Assyria. Do you see that? So here's Assyria, here's Media, here's Elam. Okay. So and then Babylon, Babylon is going to take over Assyria eventually. So these two game forces, they go against Assyria. This destruction is going to be so great and so severe that Isaiah is in like physical pain because of it. And these are the wicked people, remember? So this is a pretty big deal. If you're, just in case you're interested, so Elam, these are descendants of, they're Semites, and Media, these are descendants of Japheth, okay, from Noah. All right, so verse 3, we can stay on this if you want. Okay, therefore are my loins filled with pain. Pangs have taken hold upon me as the pangs of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it. I was dismayed at the seeing of it. when you think of a woman in labor, or when you were in labor, especially if you did it naturally, you're not just bowing down because it hurts. You are, as if you read Gileadi's version, it says, throes of agony have seized me like a woman in labor. I think that's a little bit more accurate. I am tormented beyond giving heed. Like when a woman is in labor, they can't think of anything else, right? I am too distraught to see. Mental and physical anguish, okay? My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath turned into fear unto me. Isaiah, it says he loves nightfall, right? He loves night. That's when he gets his visions. That's when he gets his rest from, remember, he's a royal advisor and prophet to the king. He gets rest then, but now he doesn't long for the night. He said, my mind reels. This is verse 4 from Gilead. I am paralyzed with fear. The nightfall I longed for has become a horror to me. Can you even imagine, right? I mean, if you've had a nightmare, you understand a little bit, I think, but this is much more than that. So, I have a note here, and this I believe is from Ludlow, but it says this could be an attack that happened in about 700 BC against Assyria, or could have been 539, so a few years later, against the Babylonians. So it's one of those things that could be a dual prophecy fulfillment. Okay, verse 5, prepare the table, watch in the watchtower, eat, drink, arise ye princes, and anoint the shield. Again, Gileadi's translation, it seems a little bit more clear. They prepare tables, they deck them with candlesticks. I think you only deck out or bring out the candlesticks if you're preparing for a feast that's going to go into the night, right? So a lengthened feast, and that's what I think, they're definitely making it a festival or a big deal party. They're eating and drinking, and he's trying to yell at them, mobilize you commanders, oil the armor. So these are the Babylonians, and they're just lollygagging or whatever, not paying attention to the peril that is on its way. So Isaiah is trying to interrupt and warn them, and he wants to give them time to prepare because he sees what's coming. Verse 6, for thus hath the Lord said unto me, go, set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. Verse 7, and this watchman, he sees a chariot. He saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses, and a chariot of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed. Gileadi, his last line on that says, he must be most vigilant, fully alert. And this is why. Because it makes sense for horsemen to be driving in to attack a place, right? But can you imagine donkeys and camels being on the attacking force? Persians actually knew how to use this. They would bring these animals who were carrying their weapons or even just their supplies, and they would make it look to the enemy like they're just coming for a visit, not necessarily a battle. So this watchman has to be super vigilant because they have to discern whether this is someone coming to just say, hey, what's up? Or, hey, we're taking you down, right? That was from, a little bit more of that information is also from the Old Testament manual, if you're interested, on page 158. Okay. Verse 8, and he cried, a lion. My Lord, I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my ward whole nights. So he's just saying, I've been standing here. I've stood guard night after night. Verse 9, now they come, and behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, Babylon is fallen. So now they have this announcement. Babylon has officially fallen. Excuse me, Jackson. And all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. So they come in, decimate it. It says, according to this verse, it seems to have been an attack from the Assyrians against Babylon. So again, they're not sure exactly which battle this is. They know that the main players are either the Assyrians, or the ones being attacked are either the Assyrians or the Babylonians. They're pretty sure, because of this verse also, that this is not when Cyrus was king of Persia and destroying Babylon, because Cyrus was very respectful of other people's beliefs, and he did not destroy their idols. So it had to have been before Cyrus came around, which was in 689. Or so they think this would have happened at least around 689 BC, early 700s. That's a lot of history for that. But if we just take it and just look at what's important here about what's applicable for us, those who are wicked, and we're going to talk about this again. I think it's in the next chapter, might be in the second half. They are wicked. When the people are wicked, they don't think about, when they exalt themselves, they really don't usually think, hey, I'm in trouble, right? It's just, hey, we're impenetrable, we're almighty. I mean, you see that with other countries. I mean, right? You see that all the time. These people don't believe that they're anything but the superpower, even though they're boosting up their army, more likely to take other people out. But they're more concerned with, the wicked people they're more concerned with pleasure. They're more concerned with what's amusing, what their entertainment is. So during this time, when we are all home and we're affected with the coronavirus, what are people doing with their time? What are people looking at and considering with the things that are going on? Are they considering that this is from God, and I better make sure I have my food storage in place, and that I'm doing my best to repent, and teaching my family, like the prophet has told us, with the home-centered gospel learning? I don't know if I got that right. Or church-supported gospel learning. Are we doing that? Or are we like, woo, more time for football, more time for baseball, more time for water skiing? Where are we putting our important emphasis during this time? Are we still preparing ourselves? Not because necessarily, we have a political attack coming from another country that we know of, but we know Satan's still trying to attack us, and we know that this is really just the beginning of the ramping up of the second coming and what's going to happen, right? So we really should be preparing our hearts. Like, this is a warning. Where are we putting and focusing our time? Okay, verse 10. I have an extra translation for this because I think the King James Version is a little confusing. So Gileadi's translation, verse 10. To you who know me, who are of my fold, I've reported what I've heard from Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel. He's basically sealing his testimony. But who is it that says, from the King James Version, who is, oh, my threshing? Another translation, this is the, I think it's called the New Israel Version. I don't remember. It's from, Ludlow uses this version. But he says, oh, my people crushed on the threshing floor. Remember that, especially if this is after the dispersion of the 10 tribes, remember that there are still children of Israel that are dispersed with these people. There are still those remnants that might still believe or have any little belief of God. And guess what? If you're not part of this group of people, then you still have to know that something else is coming. This is a warning. We have to think of it and translate it as a warning. So that first section is like an oracle or a prophecy to Babylon. Now, this next verse, we're actually going to get into, it's called the burden of Duma. I think that's how you say it. So Duma is, anyone have any questions this far? You guys are really, really quiet.
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay. Okay. I'm totally open to questions. Feel free to interrupt me if you got anything.
You got more out of it than I did, so I'm just trying to pay attention.
There was a lot to it. There really was. Like, just, I'm like, what? This doesn't make sense. So it's really interesting. The more I've dug into it. Okay. So now we're talking about Duma. So Duma is a desert oasis. It's about 250 miles southeast of the Dead Sea. Okay, so it is, can you see that? This is Duma right here. So we see Jerusalem and the Dead Sea right here. We see Duma. Okay, so this is concerning this area. So you can see this is the Arabians. These are, and you're going to see that with these names, these are from the descendants of Ishmael. Okay, so remember that Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael is the father of the Muslim race, the Arabians. Would you say that? Middle Eastern people, a lot of them. And they also have, there are things coming for them too. And I don't remember if I talked about this last week or not. So my neighbor, who is one of the most amazing people I know, she is a Muslim. And I had her, she needed to get out of the house a couple weeks ago. And I was like, hey, Lynn, let me pick your brain because I have so many questions now that I'm really studying the Old Testament. And we talked about a lot of things. And they, in their Quran, they have a lot of the same scriptures and stories that we have in our scriptures. They have the birth of Jesus, even though they only believe he's a prophet. They have the birth of Jesus. They have basically all of those, because remember, they know that they were part of Abraham's family and that the whole area around them is concerning them. And I said, okay, so tell me, what do you guys believe, like with prophecies, things that are coming? And she kind of looked at me kind of confused. And she's like, oh, our scriptures don't have prophecy in them. I said, okay, what? So we're talking about the Jewish scriptures that there is in the Quran. And she's like, they're all like points of doctrine and things that we need to do, and it has outlined it for us. She said, but no, we don't have anything that tells us the future. We just need to be good people. And so I thought that was really interesting to have scriptures where ours, if you like some of these scholars, they believe that 90% of our scriptures, and this is just Old and New Testament, they believe that 90% of them are prophecy, with the majority of those actually relating to the latter days. And I think, wow, like, I don't know, I just think it's a really interesting dichotomy. So then we're talking about here about Babylon, which is up here, right? And then we're talking right here about the Arabians. So really, it's a large area. They're all connected. These people, right? We're all connected. So let's talk about Duma. Okay, this is northern Saudi Arabia, or is that Jordan right there? Somewhere right in there. And it says, he calleth to me out of Seir. Okay, Seir is the chief mountain range immediately southeast of the Dead Sea. So it's going to be right here is where Seir is. There's a mountain range right here, and I don't think I provided a map. Let's go around. It is the home of Esau and his descendants, the Edomites. So Edom's right here, right through here, but there's a mountain range right here that's called Seir, okay? When we go to Ezekiel, let me stop this share, let me put this thing in. So we're going to Ezekiel 35, verse 2, and 25, 12 through 14. Okay, so let's go to Ezekiel. Okay.
What was the chapter verse again?
The first one is 35, verse 2. Okay, and 35, verse 2 says, remember, so Ezekiel is a lot like Isaiah. So he was also prophesying things for the future and end of times, especially. And a lot of the prophecies parallel each other. But if you compare them, then they actually fill in gaps maybe or clarify things that each is saying. Okay? But so verse 2, it says, I say unto it, thus saith the Lord, behold, O Mount Seir, I am against thee, and I will stretch out mine hand against thee, and I will make thee desolate. Okay, let's go over to 25, verse 12. Thus saith the Lord God, because that Edom hath dealt against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and hath greatly offended and revenged himself upon them, therefore thus saith the Lord God, I will also stretch out mine hand upon Edom, and will cut off man and beast from it, and I will make it desolate from Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword. Okay? They're in just as much hot water as the area of Duma. Okay? But we've got what do you call it? A watchman right there, and someone's calling to the watchman, and they're saying, what remains of the night? How much of the night is left? Okay, when we look at the meaning of, go to verse 12 first. The watchman said, the morning cometh, and also the night. If you will inquire ye, return, come. I like the two translations that I've read alternatively to this state things a little bit more differently. And so Gileadi's, the watchman replies, morning comes, though it is still night. If you would ascertain it, do so by repenting and coming back. So if we look at the meaning of morning, we look at salvation and deliverance or restoration. Okay. Go give it to Bella, sweetheart. Night, if you can parallel that, it's distress, misery, evil, apostasy. Okay, so the way that it's read in the King James Version is that, hey, light is coming, morning's coming, but guess what? Then there's more night. Where if you read it from the other translations, it says it's essentially like the restoration is coming, or salvation and deliverance is coming, but right now it's still night. It's still apostasy, there's still struggle. So even though they're starting to see this invasion and this destruction all over the place because of the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, depending on the time period, they're still told, hey, you can still repent, you can still come back to God. Okay?
So the watchman is a prophet?
The watchman could be a prophet. Or is a prophet. Okay, another thing that I think is significant about the word night, if you go to Alma, and this is 34 verse 32, I think this is really interesting too when you parallel it with this verse, because I know what I'm looking for, and then I start talking and I forget what I'm looking for. Okay, because we are told specifically in Alma, and this is real doctrine. This is 32 through 33 actually, and it says, for behold, this life is a time for men. Kisses? What's wrong? Kisses? Okay, so take off his hoodie, honey. For behold, this life is the time for men to prepare to meet God. Yea, behold, the day of this life is a day for men to to perform their labors. And now, as I have said unto you before, as ye have said so many witnesses, therefore I beseech of you that ye do not procrastinate the day of your repentance until the end. For after this day of life, which is given us to prepare for eternity, behold, if we do not improve our time while in this life, then cometh the night of darkness, wherein there can be no labor performed. So that's an interesting parallel, right? We have the light, we have the time during this day to prepare. And what do the Babylonians do, right? They're just sitting on their haunches, feasting, and not preparing. They're not even aware of what's coming. So that's a way to interpret that. Okay, so now we're going to our third burden in this chapter, and it's the burden upon Arabia. Arabia is that whole area that we talked about, right? But this is definitely talking about mostly the children of Ishmael. Okay. In the forest in Arabia shall ye lodge, O ye traveling companies of Dedanim. Okay. Gileadi, ye wandering bands of Dedanites who sojourn in the forests of Arabia. So this is, so the people of Dedanim, or the people of Dedan, they're southeast of the Gulf of Aqaba along the coast of the Red Sea. I don't know if you guys really necessarily care about the, like where the location of things are, but I think it's interesting. So just for those of you who find it interesting. Okay, so these are the people from this area right here, this tip right here, this is where they are. So they are being told right here in this burden that, or yeah, that all these areas right here are, let me just come back to this, okay. The inhabitants of the land of Tema brought water to him that was thirsty. They prevented their bread from him that fled. Super confusing. Let's look at a new translation. Bring water to greet the thirsty. Meet the fugitives with food, O inhabitants of the land of Tema. Okay, Tema, another son of Ishmael. They were primarily caravanners, and they were able to maintain security away from Babylon and Assyria until the Babylonians decided to destroy their city in 552 BC. Another group, this is also, no, I won't go to that. Okay, never mind. All right, so Tema is located on a main route between the Red Sea coast to the Persian Gulf, north to Damascus in northeast Saudi Arabia. Okay, so let me show this again. This is right, so Tema is right here. Okay, so you see Tema, you see this is where the Dedanim are, and we're seeing this is Duma, which is the previous burden that we talked about, and we started up here, right? So we're seeing that there's kind of like this.
Amy, can you share your screen?
Oh,
Yeah,
did I
we're
forget
not
to
seeing
share?
it.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I clicked on it and then I didn't hit finish share. Okay, so do you see? Okay, so we started in Duma. Now we're talking about these people right here need to start preparing to accept these people from Tema. Okay, so we have Babylon. Duma was our second burden. And now, hey, people here, pay attention, because these people are going to start in about a year. They're going to flood into you because they're going to be destroyed. Okay, for they flee from destruction. This is verse 15. For they flee from destruction, from the bared sword, the drawn bow, and the severity of war. Prepare. I like that it's like, hey, prepare. You need to accept these refugees. You need to bring them in. As Latter-day Saints, we're told to have sufficient food supply, and the original amount we were told to have was 7 years. That is a boatload of food storage. We have a good amount, and I don't know where people would keep 7 years. But part of that is to help take care of the other people, the fugitives that we're going to receive during these times that get hard. So this again is also a modern day prophecy or burden for us to know. So verse 16, for thus hath the Lord said unto me, within a year, according to the years of an hireling, and all the glory of Kedar shall fail. Okay, Kedar is up here, and this is also going to fail. So there's going to be just tons and tons and tons of refugees. And where are they going? Away from the Philistines, and they're going towards the next big body of water where it's going to be more fruitful, more vegetation, greener land. Okay, and the residue of the number of archers, the mighty men of the children of Kedar shall be diminished, for the Lord God hath spoken it. Kedar is the second son of Ishmael. an ancestor of Muhammad, according to several Muslim genealogists. And they were more like the modern Bedouins, where they did travel, but they did have a like a home base. But this is just saying there's more people this is going to affect, not just this little tiny itty bitty area of Jerusalem and Assyria and Egypt, but it's including everything. Their known world is going to be affected by what's coming, right? And beyond, but they don't know about beyond necessarily. So this is, for us, consider the whole world, even the nations that might not necessarily be bugging us, but it's going to affect them, okay? Let's see if I can find what I was looking for here. Thought I wrote it down. There is a really cool, maybe I wrote it down in here. Yes, okay. So I didn't take a picture of this and I did not type it up, but I will put it into like a nice format so you guys can look at it. But according to Gileadi, Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, so we're talking about chiasms, right? Over and over and over and over. So somebody, this scholar, broke Isaiah into two pieces. One through chapter 33 and then 34 through the end of the book. I think it's 66, right? And he folded them in half and found that there are 7 structures that parallel each other within the two halves of the book. And like a chiasm, there's a pivot point in the middle, right? So where we are now is this pivot point, and we'll go through it again. We'll hit this pivot point again in the second half of the book of Isaiah. But this pivot point is the humiliation and the opportunity for us to come closer to God, right? When we have a hard time, bitter or better, what are we choosing? Are we coming closer to God or coming further away? Where we are on this pivot point determines whether we choose exaltation through Jesus Christ or whether we are choosing Satan and destruction. Does that kind of blow your minds a little bit? Okay, so with this 7-part structure that I will send you guys, because it's really interesting, he's saying that this structure defines Babylon, and he calls it a composite entity. A composite entity made up of individual entities of various kinds. They each depict different characteristics of the whole. So Isaiah chapters 13 through 23, which we've also almost made all the way through, are different characteristics of the whole world, or Babylon, that we need to watch out for. So these evil things, okay? So, and they say, but all have one thing in common, and that is self-exaltation. Okay, and then a few weeks ago, I read a quote from Elder Bruce R. McConkie. There's the beginning of chapter 19. And this quote really struck me, because this was, if I hadn't read this first, I don't know if I would have understood what Gileadi was trying to say with composite entities. Okay, so Bruce R. McConkie used a quote that shows why Isaiah may have used such neighbors as Egypt, Moab, and Babylon to describe the wicked of the latter days. Speaking of the world, he said, Babylon marks its idolatry, Egypt, its tyranny, Sodom, its desperate corruption, Jerusalem, its pretensions to sanctity on the ground of spiritual privileges, whilst all the while is the murder of Christ in the person of his members. What do you think of that quote?
Interesting.
That's pretty profound, right? Think about all of those pieces. Do we have problems with idolatry in the world today? Tyranny, desperate corruption and immorality, pretensions, like especially this one hits the heart of God's people, especially I think Latter-day Saints. Pretensions to sanctity. I'm entitled. I deserve this and this and this because I'm God's covenant person. But are you really living that way? Is your heart really in the place where Christ is first? Or are you being like the rest where it's really self-exaltation? Okay? Just something to think about. But again, self-exaltation, you water that word down and it's pride. And then you go to the Book of Mormon, and what happens over and over and over and over? We have the pride cycle. Okay? So it's not a little thing. And that is the number one cause of God being like, hey, it's time to destroy you guys. Any thoughts or questions on that? I thought it was a really interesting perspective because I'm like, oh, where do I fall on that, right? Ooh.
Amy, what's the reference on the Egypt, Moab? What were the
Okay.
other ones?
Let's see. So do you have this brown Old Testament manual?
I'm sure I do.
Okay, if you do, it's this one, which is the second Old Testament one, and it is referenced directly on page 157.
Awesome. I'm totally gonna look that up. That's
right?
amazing.
Well, and
Amazing.
I can also type it up in an email for you guys. But
No. I'm sure I have that.
Okay, but it's from Bruce R. McConkie wrote it, and he wrote it in the Doctrinal New Testament Commentary, which it's volume 3, page 510. If you want to be specific about to find it.
I'm sure we have that too.
Okay, awesome. The other one that Gileadi wrote is in. Oh, I lost my page. It's in Isaiah Decoded. I don't know if you guys are interested in that book, but it is page 83 in Isaiah Decoded by Gileadi. Abraham Gileadi. Okay. I just thought it was such a good quote because then now, chapter 22, man, I really got all my pages messed up.
Yeah.
So it's starting chapter 22, especially now that we're looking at, hey, this is his burden directly to Jerusalem. So he just cried out to the world. Remember, in the beginning of the chapters of Isaiah, he already was saying to his covenant people, hey, stop being naughty. Hey, stop this. Because remember, that was the northern tribes of Israel. And guess what happened to them? Boom. They're no longer identified as individual tribes and are only now starting to because of the restoration of the church. Okay? But now it's to Judah, the primary covenant people of God. And now, let's see what's going on here and see how it parallels with what's going on in the world. Okay? Does anyone have any questions up to this point before I start chapter 22? Okay, and my plan today, especially now that it's 11:20, I'm only going to go through verse 14, and then we'll pick up next week on 15.
It's JJ.
Hi, JJ.
I don't have a chapter 22 in my book.
Nobody did.
It was in the email.
It was in the email from, what was that?
Did you talk about that way back in the beginning and we're finally here?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, well, and I
sent
talked
us
about it a little bit
weeks
last
ago.
week, and I sent it in the email with the translation because when I compiled all of the Word docs that I put together, I somehow lost it. So I had to re-put it together, and then it's in the email. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You were the only person that couldn't find it or didn't see it last week, so that's okay. Bella, you need to turn the sound off, please. And ideally go in a different room, okay? All right, so the other thing I noticed on the 22 handout that I had you print, the chapter heading is wrong. The chapter summary is wrong. It's not Moab. We've already talked about Moab, but it is Jerusalem becoming attacked and scourged. Her people carried captive. Messiah shall hold the key of the house of David. Okay. So I'm just making big mistakes all over. The heading also for chapter 23 is wrong. So make sure you change 23. And I haven't looked at 24 yet. Hot mess over here. Okay.
Ugh.
So chapter 22, King James Version says, the burden of the valley of vision. Okay, the valley of vision. If you go to verse 9, he talks specifically that this is the city of David. So this is Jerusalem, okay? This is the capital city of all of the house of Judah. Valley of Vision is also an appropriate name because this is where Isaiah is receiving all of his visions. for those of you who've been there, I've only seen, little documentaries, but Mount Moriah is the hill that the temple is on, and then there is a valley. It's actually two valleys that kind of run down in a V shape. And the city of David is actually down there. Okay, you have to go up to the Temple Mount. City of David, and then it's got the Kidron Valley and the other valley. What was that, Dee?
Your microphone's on.
What was that?
Dragon.
On the one side is the Mount of Olives, and the other side is the temple.
Yeah, well, in the valley, I'm just trying to remember the name of the valleys, but that's okay. So one of them is the valley of, I just said it a second ago.
Kidron,
Kidron.
isn't it the one for death, where they died?
That's okay. I just said it. We'll talk about it again in a second. It'll come to me. So anyway, so this is where he is. He's in the city of David. Okay, so this is now he's calling it the Valley of Vision. What I think is super fascinating is Gileadi translates this. It says an oracle concerning the arena of spectacles. When you think of an arena of spectacles, do you think of a city of God or a group of people of God? This translation, and remember, this is directly from the original Hebrew text. This is not Abraham saying, oh, this is what I think it should say. This is a legitimate translation from the Hebrew text. Ludlow also translates it with Valley of Vision, okay? But I don't know if there's another translation out there that says Arena of Spectacles, but I do think this is interesting. So this title, that he translates it as indicates that Jerusalem or God's people are so distracted by their infatuating amusements and worshiping idols that they are oblivious to the peril of a coming enemy and are taken by surprise. We just saw this with Babylon, right? When you're not focused on God, you're not focused on the people around you, because remember, how do you show love towards God? You serve his people. So you're aware of other people. You're aware of what's going on because you're talking to people. Otherwise, are we hyper-focused, right? Are we hyper-focused on amusement, on entertainment, on television, on sports, on anything, that is not God, that is not what God would have us focus on, right? Because there is a righteousness in focusing on a business. I mean, because a business is to serve people. So God does divinely direct those, but where in these focuses, because you can do, there's righteous people who play sports and who love sports, but where's your main focus? Are you so distracted by the world that you don't see beyond that? You don't hear the Spirit saying, hey, this or that, okay? So I think that's an interesting perspective. This is addressed to those people who are just so distracted and they can't bring back their focus. They are not interested in repenting or hearing the hard words, okay? He said this, and Abraham's translation of the rest of that verse says, whatever is the matter with you, causing you all at once to climb onto the housetops? You resounded, this is verse 2, you resounded with loud cheers, a tumultuous town, a city of revelry. But your slain were not killed by the sword. They did not die in battle. Verse 3, your chiefs, all together in flight, are captured without using the bow. All of you left behind are caught easily before you can get away. So this isn't saying they might have been killed by the sword, but it's not because they were wielding the sword. They might have been attacked, but they weren't in battle. They were captured because they were so distracted that the enemy just came and took them. Okay, this is talking about apostasy. When we are spiritually apostatizing, we will be physically punished. Does that make sense? That's how God's recurring theme is, right? When they are spiritually wicked, then they're destroyed physically. So where are they on this? Where are we on this, right? should be on there.
I know. It's me.
Okay, you're fine. All right, and then, so then verse 4, I'm gonna read a little bit, probably more of Abraham's translation, but know that I'm going back and forth between the translations. So I'll just say what verse, and then you can choose which one to read. Because of this, I said, turn your attention away from, or turn your attention from me, though I weep bitterly. Hasten not to comfort me at the ruin of the daughter of my people. For my Lord, Jehovah of hosts, has in store a day of commotion and trampling and riot in the arena of spectacles, a day of battering down walls and of crying in distress to the mountains. So this is Isaiah mourning for the losses that have already happened and that are about to happen again. God's people in this situation are not concerned with those problems. They're not concerned about their physical problems around them, and they're not concerned about the spiritual problems. The United States, people of the United States of America, we are famous worldwide for not knowing anything about what's going on outside of our country. I'm assuming you probably all know that. But we are famous for being ignorant of what's going on in the world. That's kind of scary, right? I know that I'm not an exception to that because I hate the news, but I do try to be aware of what's going on, but I'm not like absorbed in the news. My mom will tell you I hear my news through other people, and then I'll read it if I'm interested in it. So I'm guilty of that. I'm totally guilty of that. But as a nation, where are we with that? We're just like the people of Jerusalem right here, okay? And this is bad. This is bad. Okay, verse 6. And when Elam takes up the quiver, and horses are harnessed to the chariots of Aram, and Ker uncovers the armor. Verse 7, then shall your choice valleys fill with chariots, and cavalry take up positions at your gateways. So Abraham said this beautifully. He said, oh no, it was, I think it was Ludlow. He said, enemy soldiers and chariots replace the revelations and prophecies. I think that's really significant, especially if that were to happen here in the Salt Lake Valley, where our prophet lives. What would that look like? I mean, the prophecy and the revelations. I don't know. That's gonna happen in Jerusalem, and it's like, hey, if you don't care about those anyway, then the bad guys are coming. Okay, so Elam and Ker, they are part of a group of other nations that are fighting against Assyria, and they try to. So Jerusalem's thinking that they're allies, but they're not allies. They come as an ally, and then guess what? They assist in the destruction, or they fail, and then end up becoming subservient to Assyria anyway, and then, yeah. So don't lean on the arm of flesh again. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the day Judea's defensive screen is removed. And this is one reason why we're only going to 14, because I want to talk about King Hezekiah. If you don't know about King Hezekiah, oh my goodness, because I didn't. He's amazing, guys. He is the only other king of Judah that even rivaled King David. I mean, King Solomon was pretty great, but Hezekiah was great, okay? I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I want you guys to see, I pulled up this PDF, and I emailed out at one time, it was before we were in quarantine, so it could have been 2 years ago in my brain. I have no idea. The link to this website, and I can send it again. Oh, I sent out the PDF actually, in the link to the PDF in the email. So this is the magazine that I talked about when they're talking about the seals of Isaiah and King Hezekiah. Well, what happens with this magazine is they talk about everything that we're talking about with the archaeological evidence. Okay, I think this is so cool. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of this stuff based on, or when we were going over like the kingdoms, or like the north being taken and stuff. So, but right here, I want to read. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he ascended to the throne of Judah. Okay, remember his father is Ahaz. And back in chapter 5, remember Ahaz is the king that was trying to make all these alliances to save Judah. And then, he was the guy that like even sacrificed his own children to pagan gods, and like he was just a bad dude, right? So this is Hezekiah who somehow escaped not just the sacrifice of being sacrificed. He was also able, and I totally give credit to his mom, whoever she was. He had a heart of God. Like he loved God. From day one, Hezekiah set about demolishing pagan worship, renovating the temple and restoring right temple worship, cleansing the priesthood, and reestablishing God's law in the land. Right? Awesome. Hezekiah's first priority upon becoming king was to prepare the nation to keep the spring holy days. He even dispatched messengers to the northern kingdom to warn the Israelites of their sins and invite them to visit Judah to commemorate these sacred festivals. The biblical account of Hezekiah's purge of national idolatry has been verified by archaeological evidence. Pagan groves and monuments were smashed and defiled. Hezekiah also stopped his tribute payments to the king of Assyria. Under Hezekiah, Judah experienced its greatest renaissance since King David. The kingdom thrived politically, culturally, and financially. Ezra's words in 2 Chronicles 29 summarize King Hezekiah's accomplishments best. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David, his father, had done. Okay, so what went wrong? What happened? Let's kind of find out, okay? Verse 8, we're going to see, okay, so these attackers, he discovered the covering of Judah. The defensive screen is removed. And it says, and thou didst look in that day to the armor of the house of the forest. Okay, I didn't know this was a real legitimate building. It's a legitimate building. It's actually the armory that was built by King Solomon. And it's called the house of the forest because it's lined with these large cedar trees. So things are happening. They're being attacked, and the men, or probably everyone actually, rather than turning to God, which doesn't necessarily, I don't know, I think all of us, fight or flight, right? They run to the armory, and they're trying to arm themselves and see what they have and see what they can do last minute to fight off these people. And it says, verse 9, ye have seen also the breaches of the city of David, that they are many. So you're seeing that they're increasingly breached, these walls, and there's the protection is crumbling, right? And ye gathered together the waters of the lower pool. Abraham translates that you conserved water in the lower reservoir. What else happened? Verse 10, you took a census of the buildings in Jerusalem, tearing down buildings to fortify your wall. 11, you built cisterns between the walls for the water from the old reservoir. But you did not look to its maker, nor have regard for the one who designed it long ago. Okay, well, wait, what happened? Hezekiah's a good guy, right? Okay, let's see what else Hezekiah actually did, okay? Still a good guy. So he did major efforts to actually fortify the city. The first thing, when we look at the verse 9, the end, and he gathered together the waters of the lower pool. What he did, let me see if I can find, it should be on that PDF. Let me show you real quick. So, excuse me, what he did is amazing, actually. So this is really cool, by the way. If genealogy is accurate, Hezekiah is actually married to Isaiah's daughter. I thought that was cool. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. We'll just go back to it. That we talked about the other week. Okay, this is Assyria. I thought it was a cool picture. Hezekiah being fell on. There's the plans. There's a map in here. Hezekiah's tunnel, okay? I think some of you guys said you've been there, right? It's not very big, but it's pretty awesome. So it connects the Gihon Spring, which is outside of the city walls, outside of the city of David, And so the city of David is, or excuse me, the temple's here, right? And the city of David, I wish I didn't break it up there, is within the walls. So they have to go up to the temple, okay? So it's up through there. Yeah, that's what I'm going at. Okay, so they dug a tunnel from this spring outside of the walls, which was it was a natural spring, and it provided the majority of the fresh water to the people around. Okay, they irrigated from it, they pulled it from it, but also if Assyria shows up, that's where they're going to get their water source in the area. So Hezekiah, I'm going to dig a tunnel, and that tunnel is going to also go from this Siloam pool in the city of David, and they're going to connect in the middle, and we're going to drain the spring into the pool and make sure we have extra water in the city and prevent Assyria's armies from having access to this water. Okay, which I think is pretty stinking crazy. They actually, it's a 1,750 foot long subterranean passageway with no GPS. They actually met in the middle, and there is a plaque there that it says there's the Siloam inscription, which is where in the middle is, and it says that the pickaxes each crew toward the other, and while there were still 3 cubits to cut, the voice of a man was heard calling to his counterpart, for there was a break in the rock on the right, and on the day of breaking through, the miners hewed, each man toward his fellow, pickaxe against pickaxe, and the water flowed from the spring to the reservoir, 1,200 cubits. At the height of the rock above the stone cutters was 100 cubits. It is a insanely massive feat, like with how they engineered that. So he's trying to make sure that they have the water supplies. He's trying to make sure that the bad guys don't. Okay. Verse 10. He takes a census of the people. Right. He takes a census of the people. And then because of the census, he was able to reorganize his armies. How many people do we really have? How many men do we really have that we can draft? So that's all part of his fortification. Excuse me. The houses have been broken down to fortify the wall. They tore down any houses that were around the wall so that they wouldn't make it easier for the Assyrians to breach, but also use the breakage from those houses to enforce the wall. Okay, so they're doing that too. He also possibly restructured the royal administration system, which we're going to see next week with starting in verse 15. He replaces the, the treasurer or the steward of the house of David, or overseer of the palace. And he did make an alliance, tried to make an alliance with the Egyptians. And they say that they believe that this Shebna, who he replaces, that we'll see, they believe that he actually was very pro-Egyptian, and they said almost immediately when they replaced this palace steward with Eliakim, that things were a little better between them and the Assyrians. And this is before the Assyrians are actually going to show up, right? So they kind of start to ease up a little bit. But let's continue. Okay, so Hezekiah is doing all these things, right? He is a good king. He is just doing whatever he can to fortify the people. And based on what we know about him, he obviously, especially with Isaiah as his personal counselor, he's obviously telling the people through Isaiah, as well as probably his own words, saying, hey, spiritually prepare, turn to God, repent. I'm sure he's saying that. That's what their entire culture was built on. But the people did everything Hezekiah asked them to in order to fortify their city, except turning to God. So they did not have that spiritual protection. And how often do we do that? How often are we so concerned about making sure we have that internet filter and we have that clean flicks or whatever? How often are we so worried about protecting ourselves from the outside world, but we're not protecting ourselves spiritually? So that's something I think also to think about. Verse 11, I don't know if I read that. Ye made also a ditch. There was one more thing I was going to say. 11. Ye made also a ditch between the two walls for the water of the old pool, or the pool of Siloam. Pool of Siloam, incidentally, also was where they would anoint the king. They'd wash and anoint the king for his coronation. But ye have not looked unto the maker thereof, neither had respect unto him that fashioned it long ago. They're not giving honor where it's due. Verse 12, in that day did the Lord of hosts call to weeping and to mourning and to baldness and to girding with sackcloth. So there's going to be a punishment for not turning to God. But that punishment is only, as we're going to, we're going to see it's a tender mercy. Verse 13, Abraham, instead there is mirth and merrymaking, the killing of cattle and slaughter of sheep, eating meat and drinking wine. Let us dine and drink, for tomorrow we die. In Ludlow's book, he says, to describe the people eating and drinking, Isaiah uses the Hebrew infinitives to eat and to drink, thus implying continuous and excessive indulgence in revelries or loud and wild festivities and partying, and orgies, excessive indulgence in any activity. So these are excessive, they're continuous, and they're totally keeping the people distracted, or that's how they're just making their own bed, I guess. Okay. Verse 14, Jehovah of hosts revealed this to my ears. Such wickedness cannot be forgiven till you die, says my Lord, Jehovah of hosts. I have two thoughts with that, because at first you read it and it's like, whoa, brutal. I thought God loved us. The King James translation says, surely this iniquity shall not be purged from you till you die. This is not God's choice. This is the choice of the people. Our actions, are what really tells people where our hearts are, right? You can preach all you want, this serve men and love God, but if you're not being that example, people know where your heart is based on those actions. With all that has been going on around them, including the dispersion of the 10 tribes, they were still too busy seeking pleasure and being distracted with entertainment. God has given them plenty of warning. One of the things that I think was super interesting with this, let me share my screen one more time, is not only did they receive that warning because of the 10 tribes, but going up to this map, right here, we have Jerusalem right here. There is what is called a stela. There are 3 stelas, Sennacherib stelas, and there's one right here, the Taylor Prism, that talks about, I don't remember what that one talks about. We talked about this, that must be the Siege of Lachish. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. There's another one that's called the Jerusalem stela, and that one actually documents, or prism, maybe it is the Taylor Prism. Anyway, so they actually document from Sennacherib directly his military campaigns throughout the Middle East. The inscription reads in part, what was that? Oh, okay. As for Hezekiah the Judahite, who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his strong walled cities, as well as the small towns in their area, which were without number, I besieged and took them by leveling with battering rams, by bringing up siege engines, by attacking and storming on foot, by mines, tunnels, and breaches. 200,150 people, great and small, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, cattle, and sheep without number, I brought away from them and counted as spoil. As for Hezekiah, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. I then constructed a series of fortresses around him and did not allow anyone to come out of the city gates. Okay? not only are the people of Jerusalem been warned through Isaiah, they've seen the dispersion of the 10 tribes a few years before this. They have now seen 46 plus cities around them totally demolished, and they are walled in to their city. And what are they doing? They are partying, and they are being like, whoa, not us, we're good. That's devastating. That's devastating that they were so blindsided that they didn't see what was going on around them, but they had plenty of warning, plenty of witness from God and from what was going on politically outside of their walls, what was going to happen to them if they didn't turn to God. So that's where we're going to leave them, actually. We're going to leave them in that precarious position. I think that it's a good warning for us. They talk over and over extensively how, especially people outside, well, scholars, these are the most, what was the word? Hard to decipher of Isaiah's words, right? Like, we don't know exactly what they mean, we don't understand. But when we put them in the context, especially with the quote from Elder McConkie and Abraham saying that we're talking about a composite enemy and all the traits of Babylon, it brings it a little bit more home, right? It brings it more home of like, okay, where are we on this? Where are we following Moab and following, the idolatry and the tyranny and all of these things? And then we get to this piece of Judah, and these people are saying, we're of God, we're descendant of Abraham and blah, 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 blah. Where are we on that? Where are we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Where are our hearts? And where is our focus? Because it should be on God. It's our time to help assist gather Israel and then to build Zion. And that's where we need to be. So I'm excited to continue because next week we will do the second portion of chapter 22. And then we will do all of 23. Next week will be the last of these heavy burdens. And then we're going to start seeing these glorious things, this turnaround and these prophecies that Isaiah has for us. So I'm excited about that. Next week, especially when you read about the key of the house of David and Eliakim, think about a couple things for me, because I think it'll be better if I tell you now rather than be like, hey, did you think of this? Think of who Eliakim, so he's going to be kind of outlined a little bit in a messianic role. Parallel him not only with Jesus Christ, but parallel him then with Joseph of Egypt, parallel him with Joseph Smith, okay? Look at those parallels and see what you come up with. I'm curious to see, and I think it's fascinating. But yes, any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints before we close? And it still went longer than I expected. Sorry. Any thoughts?
Thanks, Amy. You're amazing.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank
Great
you.
job.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I am just blown away by all that you know about this. I love it.
It's fun. It's awesome to study, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. I know we had 4 people not join us today, but hopefully they'll be back next week. And then is there anyone who might be willing to give us a closing prayer?
I'd be happy to.
Oh, thank you, Elaine.
Yeah, and thank you for your lesson.
Absolutely.
All of this.
Thank you.
For sharing it with us. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this day, and we're grateful we can meet here together